April 1945. The Pacific Ocean. Vast, silent, and waiting. For months, U.S. carrier groups had been hunting remnants of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The war was nearing its final stage, yet one shadow still loomed over the waves. Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, the pride of Japan, and the last roar of an empire on its knees. She was a floating fortress, 70,000 tons of steel, bristling with massive 18-inch guns capable of obliterating anything that floated. But by 1945, the age of the battleship was over. The sea now belonged to the aircraft, the new kings of war. In early April, American reconnaissance planes flying over the East China Sea picked up something unusual: a massive wake cutting through the gray waters heading south. At first, intelligence officers thought it was just another convoy. But soon, radio intercepts confirmed the impossible. Yamato was moving. Her mission: a one-way suicide run toward Okinawa. Japan had ordered her to beach herself on the island's shore and fight as a stationary fortress, an act of desperation, not strategy. The Americans couldn't let her get there. Within hours, Task Force 58, the mightiest naval air armada the world had ever seen, was mobilized. Hundreds of aircraft were fueled, armed, and waiting for the order. Their target: the largest warship ever made, and the symbol of a dying empire. At dawn on April 7th, the word spread across the carriers. Target confirmed. Operation Tengo is underway. Pilots who had spent months bombing islands were suddenly given the chance to destroy something legendary. They didn't know it yet, but the battle that awaited them would be the largest air-sea engagement in naval history. The moment the sky itself would decide the fate of the ocean. From the deck of the carrier USS Yorktown, Lieutenant Commander Jack Davis looked out across the horizon. He could feel the tension in the air, the mixture of fear, adrenaline, and purpose that every man felt before takeoff. "Yamato," he muttered, almost to himself. "Let's finish this." Engines roared to life. Waves of Avengers, Helldivers, and Corsairs lined the decks, each one carrying bombs and torpedoes meant to pierce the armor of a steel giant. The U.S. Navy had transformed the Pacific into a runway, and now it was time to launch vengeance itself. The radio crackled. "Pilots, this is not just another mission. This is history. Let's make it count." And with that, the first wave of aircraft lifted into the gray morning sky. As the carriers shrank below them, the pilots looked out over the endless blue expanse. Some prayed, some laughed nervously. Most said nothing at all. Far ahead, beneath that same sky, Yamato and her escort ships steamed toward destiny. Her decks were lined with sailors, some veterans, some barely old enough to shave, each one aware of what awaited them. They had been told there would be no air cover, no retreat, and almost no chance of survival. But in their hearts, they carried the pride of a nation that refused to bow. Admiral Seiichi Ito, aboard Yamato, stood calmly on the bridge. He knew what was coming. He knew the Americans would find them long before they reached Okinawa. Still, he gave the order to continue. "Full speed ahead," he said quietly. "We sail for the Emperor." And so, two forces, the most powerful battleship in history and the most powerful air fleet ever assembled, moved inexorably toward each other. The stage was set for the last great battle of the Pacific. The gray Pacific stretched endlessly below as Task Force 58 regrouped. 14 carriers, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of men who had trained for this very moment. In the flagship's operations room, charts were spread across the table. Lines of bearing, weather reports, fuel calculations. Admiral Mark Mitcher stood silently, listening to his staff officers debate attack waves. They knew Yamato would be underway at full speed. If she reached the outer ring of Okinawa's defenses, the battle could become chaos. They had to strike first, and strike hard. The intelligence message came through at 0800 hours. Enemy force proceeding south-southwest at 20 knots. Position 26°47, N 128°58, Chadert, Site, Tan, E. That was all Mitcher needed. He turned to his air commander and said quietly, "Launch every available plane. Let's end this today." Word rippled through the ships. On the carriers Yorktown, Bunker Hill, Bennington, Hancock, and Essex, pilots strapped in. Ground crews rolled torpedoes across the deck. Armorers bolted 500 and 1,000-pound bombs beneath wings. The smell of fuel mixed with sea spray and oil. Below deck, young mechanics wiped sweat from their faces as they worked in near darkness. They didn't see the ocean, but they felt the vibration of engines above. Each man knew that somewhere out there was a ship larger than anything they'd ever imagined. And soon, their machines would test it. Lieutenant Commander Jack Davis and his torpedo squadron stood by the island structure of Yorktown. No one spoke. The flight officer walked past, shouting over the wind, "Remember your torpedo runs. Low, fast, coordinated. Hit the escorts first if you must, but Yamato's the prize." Davis smiled faintly beneath his goggles. He had lost friends at Pearl Harbor, and now, almost 4 years later, he was about to avenge them in a way none had expected. The first signal flags rose. Engines thundered. Deck crews sprinted into position, and the entire carrier trembled under the force of spinning propellers. One by one, the aircraft roared down the deck and vanished into the cloudy horizon. Avengers first, the torpedo bombers, followed by dive-bombing Helldivers, and finally the F-6F Hellcats flying escort. Within minutes, the sky above Task Force 58 swarmed with planes. They climbed through thin clouds, engines howling in unison. Below, the sea was left boiling in their wake. From high above, the formation looked endless, like a swarm of metal locusts crossing the ocean. 300 aircraft, all heading toward a single dot on the map. In the radio chatter, voices mixed with static. "Form on my wing. Keep spacing tight. Watch your fuel." They would fly nearly 300 miles before they even saw the enemy. Every pilot knew that by the time they reached Yamato, their fuel margin would be razor thin. No rescue if they went down, but no one hesitated. Hours later, they broke through a ceiling of cloud and into sunlight. Ahead, the sea glittered like molten glass. And there, barely visible against the horizon, something vast was moving. Yamato. She was not just a ship. She was a mountain of steel tearing through water. Her escort destroyers trailed like shadows. From above she looked calm, almost serene, until binoculars revealed the truth. Men lined the decks. Gun crews already stood by their weapons. Smoke rose from her funnels. She was ready. The American pilots spread out into attack formation. Helldivers climbed higher, ready to dive. Avengers dropped to wave-top level, their torpedoes armed and steady beneath them. Hellcats circled above, scanning for fighters that would never come. Japan's Air Force was gone. Davis took a deep breath. "Target in sight," he said into his radio. "This is it, boys. Let's make it count." Back on Yorktown, radar operators watched the screens. Tiny green dots merged into a storm. The battle was about to begin, and the sea itself seemed to hold its breath. At that same moment aboard Yamato, lookouts shouted from the bridge. "Enemy aircraft! Bearing northwest!" Alarms wailed across the ship. Sailors ran to their stations. Ammunition belts clattered, gun turrets turned, and steam hissed from valves. For the men below deck, the noise was deafening. Admiral Ito gripped the rail, his face expressionless. He knew this was the end, but he would face it, standing. Far above, the first wave of American planes rolled into their dives. The sky filled with movement, metal descending toward destiny. At 12:20 p.m., April 7, 1945, the silence of the Pacific shattered. From 20,000 feet above, the first American dive bombers rolled into their attack. The sea below erupted in white bursts as Yamato's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. Her guns spoke with the fury of a dying empire. Flashes of orange flame clawed at the sky. Tracer rounds streaked upward, slicing through clouds, searching for the tiny dark shapes descending from above. Each one was an American plane, diving at over 300 miles per hour straight into the storm. Lieutenant Jack Davis gritted his teeth. Smoke and flak filled the air around him. His canopy rattled as shrapnel whizzed past. He kept his eyes locked on the gray silhouette below. The monster they'd come to kill. "Steady, steady," he muttered. Below, Yamato's 18-inch guns swung upward, firing blind into the sky. The shockwave from her main battery thundered across the water, shaking even the planes above. But her massive guns couldn't track fast enough. The real danger came from her secondary batteries, hundreds of rapid-fire 25mm and 127mm guns covering every inch of the sky. American pilots described it later as flying into a steel hurricane. Davis's Helldiver squad dove straight through it. He pulled the release. A 1,000-pound bomb detached from his wing and screamed downward. He yanked back hard, the plane groaning under the G-force. Below, the bomb disappeared into a flash of smoke and spray. "Hit! Direct hit on the forward deck," someone shouted over the radio. But Yamato still moved, angry, alive. Columns of water exploded around her as torpedoes from Avengers struck her escorts. The destroyer Asashimo vanished in a fireball, torn apart. Another, Hamikaze, burst into flames and rolled to a stop. Still, Yamato fought back. Her anti-aircraft gunners, blinded by smoke and chaos, kept firing until their barrels glowed red. Every man aboard knew this was his last stand. There was no escape, no return, no victory, only duty. Then the second wave arrived. From the east, another 150 planes came roaring in. The sea seemed to vanish beneath them as they dove from every direction. Davis's radio filled with overlapping voices. "Hit the port side!" "Coming in from the stern!" "Watch the flak at midship! Jesus, they're still firing!" Torpedoes dropped one after another, splashing into the sea and running true. Yamato's lookouts screamed warnings. The great ship began to turn, her massive rudders fighting the ocean. But she was too slow. At 12:45 p.m., the first torpedo hit her port side. Then another and another. Each explosion lifted her partially from the water. Men were thrown from the decks like rag dolls. Inside, compartments flooded instantly. Electrical power flickered, then failed. On the bridge, Admiral Ito remained still. Reports poured in, fires spreading, flooding uncontrolled, ammunition rooms sealed. He nodded quietly. "Tell the engine room, maintain course, fight to the end." For the American pilots above, the sight was surreal. The world's largest battleship, once thought invincible, was now bleeding into the sea. Smoke poured from her funnels. Her deck guns fired slower, weaker, desperate. Jack Davis climbed through the smoke. He could see flames crawling across her decks like veins of light. He felt no joy, no triumph, only awe. Then came the final blow. A flight of Avengers made their torpedo run from the starboard side. 6 torpedoes struck in rapid succession. The explosions tore open her hull, and water rushed in faster than her pumps could fight. Yamato began to list sharply to port. Her enormous guns froze mid-rotation. Crewmen jumped overboard, tiny figures against the vast gray hull. At 2:00 p.m., Admiral Ito gave his last order. All hands, abandon ship. Minutes later, he returned to the bridge, drew his pistol, and saluted his flag before disappearing into the flames. At 2:23 p.m., Yamato's magazines detonated. The explosion was so massive it sent a mushroom cloud 6 miles into the sky. American pilots miles away felt the shockwave hit their planes. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but burning oil and scattered wreckage. The largest warship ever built had vanished beneath the Pacific. For the Americans, it was victory. Decisive. Absolute. For the Japanese, it was the end of an era. And, for history, it was the moment the age of battleships finally died. The sea was quiet again. Only the faint hiss of burning oil broke the silence. Where the great Yamato had once ruled, there was now only smoke, fire, and drifting wreckage. For the men who had survived, floating among debris and fuel slicks, the ocean had turned into a graveyard. More than 3,000 Japanese sailors went down with her. Only a few hundred were rescued by destroyers that never reached their destination. They clung to rafts and wreckage, watching the last fragments of their ship sink beneath the waves. From high above, American pilots circled once more. They saw the aftermath through the haze, a dark stain spreading across the sea, the last visible sign of the world's largest battleship. None of them cheered. Even over the radio, no one spoke. The sky was silent. Jack Davis looked down from his cockpit. He had imagined victory would feel different, triumphant, proud. But all he felt was emptiness. Beneath him lay not just a defeated enemy, but thousands of lives extinguished in minutes. He turned toward the sun and headed home. Back aboard the carriers, the returning pilots landed one by one. Some limped in on damaged wings, some didn't return at all. Each landing was greeted by silent salutes. They had destroyed the enemy, but the cost of what they'd witnessed weighed heavily on every man. Admiral Mitcher received the radio message. Target destroyed. Yamato sunk. Mission complete. He nodded once, expressionless, and turned to the horizon. In that moment, even victory felt like loss. News of Yamato's destruction spread quickly across the Pacific. For Japan, it was a wound deeper than any bomb crater. The ship had been more than steel. It was a symbol of national pride, of a time when Japan believed itself unbreakable. Now, that symbol lay at the bottom of the sea. In Tokyo, the announcement came in subdued tones. There was no public mourning, no fanfare, just silence. By then, people were used to silence. Cities lay in ruins. The empire was fading. For the United States, the sinking of Yamato marked the end of an era. The last major surface threat of the Imperial Japanese Navy was gone. The ocean, once ruled by battleships, belonged entirely to the carriers and their aircraft now. Historians would later call it the moment when air power finally eclipsed naval gunfire forever. The battleship, once the ultimate weapon of empire, had met its match in the sky. But for the men who fought that day, it wasn't about tactics or technology. It was about survival, about duty, about finishing a war that had consumed the world for 6 long years. Jack Davis returned home months later, when the war finally ended. He kept a photo of his squadron on his desk for the rest of his life. Whenever someone asked him what it felt like to destroy the largest ship ever built, he would just stare for a moment, then quietly say, "It wasn't about destroying, it was about ending." And so, on that gray afternoon in April 1945, far out on the empty Pacific, an empire's pride sank beneath the waves. Its final salute still echoed across the sea, carried by the wind, fading into history. The Battle of the East China Sea was over. The age of the battleship was over, and the world had entered a new era, where the sky, not the sea, would decide the fate of nations.